This is the Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Bruschi.
And this is our series on extreme beliefs. Today, we delve into a fascinating exploration of ideologies that push the boundaries of conventional societal norms and examine their effects on their followers. You may have heard of Scientology, known for its Hollywood adherent and secretive practices, or the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, FLDS, recognized for its controversial polygamous practices. Yet these are just two examples with an expansive landscape of extraordinary belief systems. Our focus today narrows into the Word of Faith Fellowship, a church in North Carolina led by Jane Whaley, which stands accused of severe misconduct and abuse. These are, however, just allegations. It's essential to note that Word of Faith Fellowship fervently denies all allegations brought against them. Today, we aim to shine a light on those accusations in a 5-part podcast series about the Word of Faith Fellowship from the reporting of Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for the Associated Press, Mitch Weiss.
Well, I can tell you, I never thought that I would ever be, covering a church/cult. Mm-hmm. But in about 2012, I got an email from a friend of mine who said that a kid had escaped this church and he was being held there against his will, and he was being beaten because he was gay. And that essentially this church/cult would scream at him. Mm-hmm. They believed that if you screamed loud enough that you could scare people had devils inside.
Sure.
And that if you screamed loud and long enough, those devils would leave. And so this kid had, quote, gay demons. And he had escaped. And there were some people in this organization that I knew that were trying to help him and trying to bring attention to this church. Mm-hmm. So I went up there and I met with this kid. His name was Michael Lowry. And he told me the story about this church, that at the time they were keeping men in this building. They wouldn't let them go. He was being kept in this building as well. He told me a little bit about the leadership of the church. And, we started talking. I didn't know much about Word of Faith Fellowship. I read a few articles that had been written about them in the 90s, but there really wasn't much else on them. Inside Edition had run a piece in 1994, and that was really about the extent of it. There really wasn't a lot written. And so I said, okay, well, let me look into your allegations. And about a few days later, after I'd interviewed him, I got a call from one of the leaders of this group that had called me saying that, he had escaped. And they said, we can't find this kid anywhere. We can't find Michael Lowry. Mm-hmm. And I said, what do you mean you can't find him? And they told me he was staying in the home of one of the organization's leaders. And they had no idea where he was. So I got in my car and I drove about an hour and a half up to Spindale, where the church is located. And I knocked on his parents' door and they looked at me like I was an alien. It was like, I didn't know the rules and regulations at the time. And you're not really supposed to show up to anybody's house without permission from Jane Whaley, who is the leader of the church. Mm-hmm. And essentially what happened was they told me I would have to speak to Jane. Now, I had no idea that you're not allowed on the grounds. You have to have permission to even go on the compound. But I just drove my car onto the compound. I knew somebody who knew her when she lived in Tulsa, and her husband was teaching at Rhema Bible College.
Okay.
And so when I got to the front desk, they looked at me like, don't you know you're not supposed to walk in here without permission? And of course, again, I'm a pretty aggressive journalist. And I said, no, but I know somebody who knows Jane. And I dropped the name. And a few minutes later, Jane came walking out. and she was dressed, in the skirt and, this blouse with pearls, and her hair, was dyed blonde, and it was, had a lot of Aquanet on it. It was up high, almost like a bouffant in a way.
Yeah.
And she had rings on almost every finger. And she said, well, how do you know that person, meaning the person who I name dropped?
Yeah.
And I told her how. I knew him when I moved to Greenville. And she looked at me, and I think she thought I was harmless. So she took me for a tour of the church. And I went from room to room. They have a school there. And every room I went in, she would ask the children to sing. And the children would sing these church songs that I never heard of. And they sang the songs one way, loud. There was no modulation. It was just all loud, like they were marching, constant, step by step by step. And every classroom I went in, they sang the same way. And then she took me to a part of the building that she called her Holocaust Museum. And essentially what happened was, I later found out, was the Department of Social Services had investigated the church for allegations of child abuse back in 2005. And they spent a ton of money, and they actually won. And this is the only DSS agency in the country that has to ask permission from church leaders before they can go up and investigate any allegations of child abuse. I would find that stuff out later. But the point is, she set up, with some of the money she won against DSS, she set up this Holocaust Museum. And I recognized some of the images. They were paintings of iconic photographs, children with their faces pressed against barbed wire, photographs of shoes and toys that were taken from young Holocaust victims.
Yeah.
And they had the children in their school study the Holocaust and paint pictures based off of these photographs. And the reason she did this was because she equated her struggle with DSS in the county to the systematic extermination of 6 million European Jews. And I'm standing there, a little stunned by what I'm watching and listening to. And finally, she looked at me and said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, I thought maybe you know where Michael Lowry is." And she looked at me and said, "He's in the basement." And that was the beginning of my journey. They let me interview him for a little bit. He was not the same Michael Lowry I had interviewed a few days earlier. He looked like he might have been on drugs. He was stoned. And I remember that day saying to him, "If they are holding you against your will, you can walk out of here with me right now.
Yeah.
No one's going to stop you." And again, little did I know, I knew nothing about the church, but had he tried to walk out with me, they would have stopped him.
Sure.
But I didn't know that at the time. And he said, "I made up the whole story. I wasn't abused here. They didn't hold me against my will. I'm not gay." He recanted everything. So at that point, I didn't know what to do. All I had was Michael Lowry telling me a story, and then a few days later recanting. But there was something about the look in his eye, something about the way he told me that story, that I knew there was something wrong. And I promised myself that I wouldn't give up. And over the next 3 years, I would reach out periodically to people who had escaped the church. There was a woman up there, her name was Nancy Burnett, and who tried to help survivors when they did leave. And in about 2015, I had gone as far as I could go. And I remember telling Nancy, if I don't talk to anybody else if nobody wants to come forward and talk to me about what's going on inside this place, my editors are going to pull me off this story.
Yeah.
I want to help, but I need to know more. I need people to tell me what's going on inside.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't hear anything back for about 2 weeks. Then all of a sudden, one day I'm driving home from work. And to let your listeners know, I work on the Associated Press National Investigative Team.
Yep.
And all I do is national investigations. That's all I do. And I'm driving home and I'm mulling over a couple of investigations I want to work on. And I get a call out of the blue from this guy named John Cooper. And John Cooper had escaped Word of Faith Fellowship. He was now in medical school at the University of North Carolina. And he said, Mitch, I know that you've been reaching out to people who have left, and a lot of us don't want to talk. We want to put all of this behind us because a lot of us were born into the church. We were brought in by our parents. We had no idea there was another life outside the church.
Yeah.
I'm in medical school. Maybe I should move forward, but I can't. There are too many children that are inside there, too many children that are being abused, too many bad things that are happening. If you can come up here, I will talk to you. And that was in the summer of 2015. I drove up there. I spoke to, John Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
He had a friend of his, Jamie Anderson, who left, who's an attorney. And they told me stories that just sounded like fiction. Men being held in buildings who were beaten because they had obscene, or what they thought were obscene thoughts. Mm-hmm. Families that were separated. Families who were forced to work at church-run businesses. Children being separated from their parents and placed with ministers, and then told their parents were no longer their parents, the ministers were. And the abuse, the physical abuse, the sexual abuse. And it went on and on and on. And they only had one request from me. And it was only two of them who talked that day. It was Jamie Anderson and John Cooper. And their request to me was this: keep looking into it. We'll help you find some survivors. And then you're going to have to do the other legwork. But don't go over the top. Mm-hmm. This is not a story where you need to. Everything that you're going to hear is true. And I made them that promise. And from those two people that I talked to more and more and more people who had escaped, people who were fresh and coming out. And by the time the Associated Press ran that first story in January of 2017, I had talked to about 50 former members, all who were living in different parts of the country, who were all independent of each other, telling the same stories over and over and over. And it was heartbreaking. That lower building, they had children in that lower building who were separated from their parents. And the only reason they were down there was because they had sexual thoughts. They were accused of masturbating, of just
basic human things, really, of what right. goes on as you get older and as you explore that.
Exactly. And I got to learn the basics of the church. They do something what's called blasting. Mm-hmm. They believe that there are ghosts. There are demons that basically get inside people. And those demons make you do bad things. And the only way to get rid of those demons are to scream and yell at those demons to get out. So you can spend hours screaming and yelling at people who might have had a dirty thought, or a person who might have thought they did something wrong. A baby who is crying because they're hungry isn't crying because they're hungry or they have a dirty diaper. No, they're crying because they have a demon inside.
There's more to come in our discussion with Mitch Weiss about the Word of Faith Fellowship. Be sure to press subscribe wherever you download podcasts so you don't miss any more of our conversation as we continue to drop them throughout the week here on the podcast. My name's Tony Bruschi. Stay with us. Word of Faith Fellowship fervently denies all allegations and accusations brought against them.